She's a very critical thinker. And she's been
Supriya didi kantana.
उहाँको चाहिँ इन्टरनेट प्रब्लम भयो कि उहाँ चाहिँ आउट हुनुभयो एक मिनट सदिशा केही भन्न खोज्नुभयो धेरै नहोला सदिशीजी
म खुवालाई नै कज्जु ल
अनलाइन गर्नु
start yeah call yeah okay I think oh Supriya
yeah, my apologies for that little hiccup there. I clicked the button with the notification. But anyway, let me continue with the introduction that I was giving. So she's been very active and she's published 2 books that I know of regarding various like nitty-gritty things about Nepalbhasa, like creating neologisms, creating more intersectionally friendly language in Nepalbhasa. So that's about it. I'm going to open the floor and sort of hand over the mic to Rukshana to proceed with her talk for us today. Yeah, take it on, Rukshana.
Hi, everyone. Do I have to speak in English? English,
because
thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, Supriya. So like again, like as everyone has already told about me, I'm Rukshana Kapali. I'm studying law. I'm also studying linguistics. I've been writing several books. Actually, I've written like around 13 to 15 books regarding various issues on linguistics. I'm also actively involved in LGBTI rights movement. So it's mostly like, you know, I'm like running across several movements, but also like bring in these different intersectionalities and you know, where these all different movements overlap. And sometimes I do feel that I'm part of all these movements, but sometimes I'm also like, you know, okay, where do I position myself? Or sometimes it's also difficult to see yourself being a part of certain movement because all these like, you know, different movements sort of exist in their own bubbles, and sometimes like trying to bring them together, or like there's no like, you know, this conversation around connection between these several movements. So yeah, thank you very much, Nepalbhasa, for inviting me to this talk, for giving me this platform, allowing me to speak to people. I'm actually very glad to see, like, you know, people coming up and learning Nepalbhasa and, you know, claiming their native language or just like learning Nepalbhasa. I'm actually very, I follow Teach Nepalbhasa, and I really like, you know, the work that it's been doing. So to talk about, I would like to start about with my own experience of realizing how I sort of discovered myself coming in the Nepalbhasa or Newa movement. I grew up like in Patan in Yala. Basically, it's an old Newa town. I live very near Darbar Square. It's very densely populated Newa settlement, but the thing with our generation was our parents, they thought like if they taught us Nepalbhasa, they spoke to us in Nepalbhasa, then we'd become weak in English and Nepali, and we would become less competitive in you know, in the world. So actually they themselves spoke in Nepalbhasa, and they didn't spoke to us in Nepalbhasa. They spoke us in Khas language, in Parvate Bhasa. This was how actually people in our generation were growing up, and I'm pretty sure that's still the case for a lot of like children, a lot of young people, and for a lot of people of my generation. I was also growing up with the same context, you know, where the senior generation, the generation above us, they spoke to themselves in our own language, and they spoke to us in Parvate Bhasa because like they didn't want us to have the accent, like, you know, the ta thing, and then like they basically didn't want us to have the accent, and basically believe that if they taught us Nepalbhasa, then we'd be poor in English and Nepali. So yeah, so basically in this context, I don't remember this, but my parents say that I didn't speak Nepalbhasa when I was very small. I spoke to them in Parvati Kura because that was the language that they were speaking to me. But then my grandmother was a monolingual. She's no more. She passed away a few years ago. She was a monolingual Nepalbhasa speaker. So if anyone had to talk with her in the family, one had to use Nepalbhasa. If we talked in English, like English was never talked at home. If we talked in Parvati Bhasa, then she wouldn't understand a word of it. So not just my grandmother, but also one of my mama, like one of my kaki, she was also very, she was not comfortable. She didn't know a lot of Parvati Bhasa. So I had this opportunity to at least speak with, few people in Nepal Bhasa. Otherwise, it was mostly like hearing, like, people of the senior generation talking among themselves, and that having monolingual family members sort of gave me the opportunity also to be able to learn how to speak the language. So I didn't become one of those like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but I cannot like, reply, or I cannot speak back to you. But then, like, even despite that, I was growing in like Newa society, I sort of like never understood a lot of things about our own culture, about our own history, about our own society, and about our own language within our family circles. There was never such kind of political conversations about language within our families. So there was this like, one instance where I was like looking at this Nudaya Bintuna, so the Nepal Sambat New Year, there were these banners on Nudaya Bintuna, and then like I was looking at one of the banner and I saw this new different kind of alphabet that I'd never seen. And I was like, okay, what alphabet is this? I was wondering what alphabet that was. And we were talking about like, I was asking with people, I was very like, curious and asking a lot of stupid questions to people, throwing up questions to people as a child. And then like I came to know like, okay, this is our language script. Then I was like, okay, so our language can also be written. I was like very shocked, to actually realize that our language can be written. Like I thought like our language was a language that was spoken at home, and that was all about it, right? So when I first came to know that our language had a script, then I actually went to certain bookstores locally in the town. I started asking, are there books learning, Newa alphabets? And then that's when I found the book of Robinson Sakya. And I not just found out that we had our own writing, we had several writings. There was like Nepal Lipi, Ranjana Lipi, Fujimo Lipi, and several other scripts like Litumo, Patumo, Huma. And I was like, oh my God, this was something that was like, very new to me. And I think a lot of younger generation, a lot of young folks, a lot of Newa young folks today also might be actually very unaware about their own language. And luckily, the same time, I was probably in my 7th grade. I went to this. I was walking around Patan, and I found out in a wall a paper that was put. Basically said Thana Ranjana Lipi Sheni. Here we teach Ranjana Lip script. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I exactly wanted. And I went to the class and I joined the class, and that was my first exposure to, learning about my own language, which is basically like, okay, you had to literally join a class to learn very basic information about your own language. It was basically learning Ranjana script and Nepal script. But despite that, it was not just limited to, learning the alphabet, but they also taught us the grammar. They also taught us the politics, the history around our own language. And for me, it was a chunk of new information that probably even like, in my parents didn't know it, or like people in our, extended families basically didn't know that long history of Nepalbhasa revolution, movements, etc., etc. And that's how I slowly started to discover about this movement. And I think for me, for my generation, because I was never exposed, like, because it was for the first time I heard that our language could be even written. I was never exposed to Nepalbhasa books. And I started actually digging out, I started getting information about Asa Safukuti. I started getting information about Nati Bazar Safutuku, a bookstore. And then that's how I started, self-exploring. And since I was a child, I had to convince my parents to give me pay money for the books. And I still remember it's those times when I used to, collect a little sum of money that I used to go to Nati Bazra around once a month, twice a month, and buy a few books. And that's how I actually taught myself Nepalbhasa. I never sort of like joined very formal classes apart from the script classes. And I started, learning about my own language from the books that were available in the stores. Sorry. Yeah, so I think so for me, for my generation, basically it was social media that sort of introduced me to Newa activism. I had no idea about existence of Nepalbhasa movements, Newa activism. I remember I was 16 years old. I just passed SLC, and I was looking on social media, and I saw this rally, mother language rally that was happening in Bodhaiti. I was 16 years old. And I walked there by myself. And I was standing just like, in the sidewalk where there was the rally. I was observing. I was actually very happy that, there were gatherings. There were like, there were gatherings regarding to my own language. And I had never participated or even heard of such kind of gatherings. And then folks who were Nepalbhasa activists, they approached me like, where are you from? Like, they started talking to me, and that's how I started reaching out to people. That's how I started getting connected to Nepalbhasa activism. So this was like my brief story about how I sort of discovered about my own language, which is actually, ironic. Like discovering about your own language. And it really describes a lot about, the context and situation of our own language, or like, the whole system that we live in. Right. And so this was about my brief journey of discovering into Nepalbhasa activism. And then I also, in past years, especially in my teenage times, I involved in a lot of different groups, in a lot of different movements. There are, of course, there are a lot of things that I've learned from the movements. I've learned from being parts of the group. But in recent times, I'm sort of on my own, not really becoming part of group, not becoming part of different groups. It was basically because I realized that a lot of groups that I was involved in were very monotonous and lacked that intersectional point of view that I was mostly coming from. Like for example, I went to the Newa movement, and then they would start talking very misogynist or very homophobic or transphobic things. Or if I went to the LGBTI movement, then they would sort of dismiss my Newa identity. They dismiss the work that I was doing in Nepalbhasa. And that's why I sort of still feel this discomfort with associating with groups. But recently I found these ways to interconnect with all these different movements that I've been working on. Like Vishnu Chitrakar sir, he has actually in past years helped me with coining neologisms about LGBTI people in Nepalbhasa. For me, it was very important, sort of a very important momentum both for Nepalbhasa movement and for the LGBTI movement, because there was this sort of lack of language, lack of vocabulary that we would communicate about LGBTI issues in Nepalbhasa. The time when we coined different terms in Nepalbhasa about LGBTI people, it was also the time when there were no such kind of vocabulary, even in Parvati language. Most of the vocabulary were used in English, and there was very limited number of vocabularies like Samalingi or something like that in Parvati Kura. But in Nepalbhasa, we developed a lot of extensive kind of vocabulary, and even in Parvati Kura, the vocabulary came up around 2018, and in Nepalbhasa, we'd already started working on it since 2016. So it was definitely something that contributed both to Nepalbhasa movement and LGBTI movement. And I think both of the movements do not acknowledge that as a contribution to their movement, because there's a lot of lack of intersectional ideas regarding within the movements, right? So yeah, I think in past years also we did review the terminologies, the vocabularies that came up that we devised in 2016. And since I'm also studying law, I started studying law since last year. I'm second year now. And I've also been thinking about, because the Language Commission has recommended Nepalbhasa as an official language in Bagmati province, and also in certain areas of Gandaki province and province number 1. And also local bodies have been adopting use of Nepalbhasa. So I'm actually very concerned about different aspects of when it comes to using Nepalbhasa, because a lot of terms our language never got that opportunity to develop itself within these sectors of administration and legal work. So now when it comes when we get the opportunity to use our own language in government offices, in the courts, what are the things that we need? What are the linguistic equipments that we need? And probably, I'm definitely sure that Vishnu Chitrakar Stories is going to help me with this this process. So also I've also started thinking about writing legal documents in Nepalbhasa. How would that look, right? Also, what are the vocabularies that we are going to use in Nepalbhasa when we're going to do government work, or when we're going to use it in the government offices? Yeah, so these are some of my own experiences with the movement. I'm sorry, I might be all over this evening, since I'm actually very tired. I hope I tried to cover whatever aspects, whatever experiences that I have. Yeah, I think I would do this much for now.
Thank you, Rukshana, for your talk. Now we'll take questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask Rukshana.
Well, I guess a question from my side would be just this process of coming to terms with your Newa identity and learning the language and everything. And you did talk about facing some difficulties along the way, which you are seeking to overcome. But on the whole, what do you think this process sort of has been like, or let's say, if someone were to say, if there's a Newa person and they can't speak Nepalbhasa and they're not very interested in Newa history and Newa identity, and they're like, well, I mean, does it really matter? What's the benefit to me? It's we're in this modern age, we're all global citizens. What matters is all these skills that can earn us money, and learning Nepalbhasa, that doesn't do anything for me. What would be, I think, a response that you might sort of brainstorm from your side to say to someone like that?
I think that's one of the very difficult questions about, folks who would sort of like dismiss like being part of the Newa culture. I'm not really sure how I would answer that question. For me particularly, it was about learning who you are. It was about my identity, and basically about it was basically about how historically that our language, our culture has been oppressed, and how we sort of don't have a say about our we don't have a say about our own culture. And it's basically about all these different oppressions on basically the concept of being a Nepali, how our own culture and our own language is not the representative of being Nepali. And it's sort of like, for me, it's sort of like reclaiming that space that you were that was snatched away from us. So yeah.
And as a kind of follow-up to that, like for example, in terms of other people of your age, your contemporaries, like within the Newa community, like other Newa youths who are around the same age as you, what has your observation from your perspective? Like how is it among them in terms of wanting to learn more, or is there not? And also, like, what are some things that you think that seniors in the Newa community can do to help sort of bring this younger demographic into, getting to learn and know more about their own culture and identity?
Right. I think one of the things that in my observation, is a lot of people of our generation are actually very carefree and not interested in Newa stuff, and there's this notion of connecting being Newa with being like old fashioned or something like that, and and I think it's basically that what I've seen is a lot of people who understand the historical perspective of Newa oppression. They, despite sort of not having, not for example, not acquiring the language at home as it should have been, are starting to reclaim their language. For example, like folks in this class, in basically attending class, is basically an example of how sort of like young people are also reclaiming. Like in my observation, it's basically about the awareness and the knowledge, basically about your own history. But I think a lot of people in my generation do not have, are not even exposed to those facts and those facts and figures. Like, for example, in chat, so the chat said like a lot of us still don't know how our language is suppressed. Even I didn't know. It's too sad. Like, even I didn't know in past that our language was suppressed. And I think there's a lot of information. There's a lot of gap of information that flows into people of our generation, and I think that's also something that's keeping away people of our generation from coming into the field of Newa activism. There are a lot of issues that I would say exist within the Newa movement, and there are a lot of there are a lot of problems that actually keeps away from young people from coming in. I think one of the thing is this attitude towards young people, seeing young people as a population to be mobilized. Like, okay, so here's this event, bring these many young people to do blah blah blah, to do blah blah blah. But then young people are not seen as a population that can make their own decisions, that can come. And actually young people are more innovative, and we have our own creative ideas that we can put into the table. But I think I see that there is a lot of sort of I wouldn't say rejection, because I see a lot of senior generation Newa people saying, we need to bring the youth. But I think there's no acknowledgement about the fact that young people are not just the population that like senior people are going to mobilize, they're going to execute their work with, but also that they can come in the table, they can bring their decisions, they can make their decisions, and they can bring their ideas into the table. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest reason. And also because like we in our generation, we have a lot of discourses around social justice, which is like we see that gap among senior Newa activists, like let's say about women's rights or people with disabilities or LGBTI people. I think that's also something that especially sort of like a lot of folks who are marginalized within the Newa community sort of like feel with the movement. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have a question from Jeevan. So Jeevan, would you like to unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rukshana, for your presentation and
Please go on your camera.
Okay, sir. Okay, thank you, Rukshana, for your wonderful presentation and wonderful work that you have been doing. Actually, I just wanted to know, like you said in the beginning that when you were a kid, like your family members, they used to talk with themselves in Nepalbhasa, but they used to talk with the kids in the Khas language, so that they would not maybe have to go through harassment or like that thing by speaking their mother tongue. So that was some time back now. After you have been in this movement and been through learning of the culture and history, after all these years, if you look into your locality now, do you see that the awareness in the current generation of parents has increased, like that they need to actually teach their children Nepal Bhasa from the very early beginning, or do you think it's still the same? So I just wanted to know that.
Thank you for that question. I think it's still the same, like based on my observation, even in my extended family, sometimes I feel like I'm being the villain, like, like sort of like, persuading people to speak Nepal Bhasa. I think there is this, notion that Newa Bhaye, like there's no use of Nepal Bhasa. It's sort of like taken very deep rooted, and I think it's not just about like it's not just about people, it's not just about us who speak the language, but it's also about the systems and the institutions that we live in. It's also about the state, because the situation that our language is facing today is not because of the native speakers, just so like abandoning their language, but it's because the state that has created a situation where people are sort of like obliged to abandon their language because like they get humiliated for not knowing Khas Bhasa more, like as like the native speakers. So it's basically about sort of having like forcing people to fit into the notions of being Nepali, or basically like our language being outlawed from using in the state. For example, if I was to say, like, if I could do every government work in Nepal Bhasa, let's say 50 years back, or like even 40 to 50 years back, if just like whatever we could do in Khas Bhasa, if the same equal rights were granted to Nepal Bhasa, and every work that we can do in Nepal in Khas Bhasa was also granted, the same rights were granted to Nepal Bhasa, then the situation of Nepal Bhasa would have been different, because probably, like, of course, because like in my grandmother's generation, a lot of people didn't know how to speak Khas Bhasa. When we would ask, for example, we'd ask, "Ma'am, can you pale ke bhasa pinyo kumorula?" Like, or weren't there a lot of people who spoke Khas Bhasa in your times? Then she would say, a lot, like those like were considered to be high caste Newa. They were only selective number of those people spoke Bhasa, especially those who were close to the Darbar, the Rana people. They were the only ones who spoke Bhasa, So it's basically about like when the state denies you that opportunity, when the state obliges that you must speak Bhasa, you must, learn that perfect grammar and be able to perfectly converse just like the Khas people do. Then that is the whole reason, like, sort of like that obliges people to abandon their own language. So I think it's also about like, state policy, about like the institutions that we live in, which has created this situation. Yeah, that's it.
Actually, I have a follow-up question on that. Like when you were explaining about the operation of the state, of course, that's that's not hidden, right? But what I wanted to know is like, do the current generation of Newar childrens like are they aware of the operation of it's the language operation or there are a lot of things like so are they really aware of the operation by the state because of their language and because of their culture, and is it because of that that they actually might not want to learn their language, like because I currently teach at a school and I hear one of few students actually maybe conversing with each other in their own mother tongue, but most of the times when they speak together also they speak the Khas language and all these things. So is it because they are aware of the operation, or like what to say is that if I reframe my question, like are they aware of the operation and they actually um, I don't know, they actually do not want to use the language, or they are not aware of the operation, and they do not know the importance of the language, and they are also not taught about the operation and not taught about the importance of the language. Like I think I don't know how I'm framing my question.
I think I sort of understood what you're trying to say, right? First of all, I think I would see the major cause of like younger generation abandoning their language or not giving interest in their language is basically this whole system that has been created, which favors Khas language and also like denies our languages from equal rights that Khas language has got. First of all, and second of all, I think a lot of like younger generation today, like even people of my generation, are not aware about the oppression, are not aware about the history, because there are no there aren't much of resources, there aren't much of knowledge that's provided. Like nowadays there might be some sort of reach to these kinds of conversations due to social media, because for me, if there was no social media, then I would probably have not really got into Newa movement. I would have not got those perspectives. I used to follow certain kinds of social media pages. I used to scroll through the these different heating debates that used to happen on social media, and that's how I sort of came to know. And I think it's still very limited. For example, if I want to Google about Newa history, then I'm not sure whether there are enough resources or not. I'm sure that there are no enough resources that would even help us to self-educate about history, about our own history. If I had to Google about Nepalbhasa, if I had to Google something where Google for to learn Nepalbhasa, then I'm sure that there aren't ample resources for me to teach myself Nepalbhasa. There's no resources, internet, and you're not even taught in school. So it means like there's very limited access, even for Newa people, to learn anything about their culture or anything about their own language. So yeah, I think I sort of addressed your question. I've also noticed that Anurup Gulabani, sorry if I pronounced it incorrectly, I think we are on Twitter. I do want to address some of the questions that they've put forth on the chat. The first question they've asked is which is more prevalent here, Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur? I've seen Ranjana used in writings or walls and signages. I think one of like two major scripts that are prevalent in Nepalbhasa are Ranjana and Nepal Lipi. Nepal Lipi is mostly like used like in all sort of common documents, and Ranjana is mostly used in like, you know, writing the headings on the signboard, like something that has to be beautified basically. And of course, like Devanagari has sort of taken over writing Nepalbhasa because during the Rana period, writing Nepalbhasa was almost like extinct. There were very few people who wrote in Nepalbhasa, and so if you would like, you know, read these books of history about how Nepalbhasa movement started during the Rana period, then there's sort of this there was this discourse where they thought that teaching a new script that was already forgotten by a lot of people would be more difficult for the language. So language would at least exist in speech, in spoken form. So if you would like, you know, use the alphabet that was already known to a lot of people through learning Khas-Bhasa, then it would be easier for people to start reviving writing of Nepal-Bhasa. So that's how Devanagari got into, right? And then like it was followed up by revival of Ranjana Lipi and Prachalit Nepal Lipi. Sorry, it's not Prachalit Nepal Lipi. That's a misnomer that's been popular. It's just Nepal Lipi, right? So these revival campaigns on you know, these revival campaigns focus on Ranjana Lipi and Nepal Lipi, and that's why those are two very prominently used scripts. And the other question is, how is Nepalbhasa different from Khas? I think that's not something we can address it here because like that there are two completely different languages, so of course it's different, and that would require some different kind of conversation. Right, and then there's this question number 3, is Nepalbhasa an official language for official document in at least some parts of Nepal? I wouldn't say yes, because the Language Commission has recommended it for the Bagmati province and some parts of Gandaki province and province number 1. It's just recommended like a few months ago. It's not come into an implementation. For implementing that, the provincial assembly needs to pass a bill into an act that would actually come and implement that, but we don't know when that's going to happen. But certain local bodies have, especially in the valley, have adopted some kind of practices that sort of recognizes Nepalbhasa, but I would say that's not enough yet. There are 2 local bodies, Lalitpur Metropolitan City and Kirtipur Municipality, that has declared Nepalbhasa as an official language. But what they do is like they accept, like even Kathmandu Metropolitan City. Kathmandu Metropolitan City does not seem to have made an official declaration to adopt Nepalbhasa as an official language, but they seem to do this practice as well. What they do is like they would accept your letter if it's written in Nepalbhasa and if it's written in Devanagari, but then they would like make someone a Nepalbhasa. There's something called a Nepalbhasa Dex that would translate that into Khas-Bhasa, and then work would be done in Khas-Bhasa. So I wouldn't see that as a recognition. It's basically a tokenized, you know, it's basically like, oh, just to show off that we've done something, but actually it's not. Like for me, Nepalbhasa being an official language means it's getting equal rights to Khas-Bhasa. It's basically about whatever you can do in Khas-Bhasa, you also get to do that in Nepalbhasa. So I would say there's no, like, you know, not even in at least some parts of Nepal, you can use Nepalbhasa as an official language.
Rukshana, I have a follow-up question on that kind of like I know that you were able to obtain the official document from the government where it said like Nepalbhasa should be called should be referred as Nepalbhasa and not Newari or something like that. So could you talk more about that, like what the process was like and all of
Oh
that?
wow. Okay, so it's basically that in when was that? Around 1997, I guess so. It's 2052 Vikram Sambat, right? 3 years ago I was born. The cabinet, the Council of Ministers made a decision that they would use the term Nepalbhasa officially, not Newari. And it was something that I was hearing a lot in social media. Like I would see that clip from Gorkhapatra newspaper or the Rising Times, the Rising Nepal. It's Nepal. The title would be It's Nepal Bhasa, and then it's a news clipping. And Gorkhapatra's clipping, it's Abadihi Nepal Bhasa. And there would be news that talked about from now onward, the term Newari will not be used. Sorry. Is something that's declared by the cabinet. And because I had been hearing about this a lot within the Nepalbhasa movement, and I wanted to get the official document. Also, I think because I'm a law student and, sort of like, because these sources were sort of not authentic and you couldn't really use them to lobby for your lobbying or advocacy purposes. So I wanted to have the official copy of the decision, not just the newspaper clipping. Well, it's a very long story because it took me 2 years to get that one document, literally 2 years to get that one single page. I've actually written a book on summary of the journey of whatever had happened, for me getting that document. It was quite of a mess. I had to write several letters to because it was in the news, it said it was decided by the cabinet. So the cabinet, the related authority would be the Office of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. And then I would send them an application and they would say, this is not something related to our office. Go and ask with the Ministry of Culture and Civil Aviation. And then I would send letter to Ministry of Culture and Civil Aviation and they would say it's not related to us because the decision is from 2052 BS, and only in 2057 BS was the ministry handed over the responsibility regarding culture. Before 2057, the ministry didn't oversee the sector of culture. And then there was this another news clipping where it was said that the then Minister of Communication, Radhakrishna Mainali, directed the media to use the term Nepalbhasa. Then I because it was the Minister of Communication, I wrote to Ministry of Information Technology and Communication, and they would say this is not something related to us. You have to ask the Office of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers. Then I would send to the Office of Prime Minister and Council of Ministers, and they would say, yeah, no, this is related with communication, so you have to ask with the Ministry of Communication. And then I got so pissed off, them sending here and there, and then I decided to write a collective letter to all of these ministries and say, okay, which one of you is actually responsible? You just can't keep on throwing me here and there. And then they didn't stop throwing me here and there. The Office of Prime Minister pointed out the Ministry of Communication. The Ministry of Communication again pointed out it to Office of Prime Minister. So I filed a case at the Information Commission. And even in the Information Commission, it was the same process. Ministry of Communication literally sent a list of regulations that talked about documentation of decisions of cabinet, and there was a lot of back and forth. And finally, after 2 years, I got that official document from Information Commission. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It just shows your perseverance and dedication, and I think we need more people like you in today's generation.
Thank you so much.
So are there any other questions?
Or perhaps, if not questions, maybe there are people here who can share. Maybe there are some things like similarities that they find between, their own life circumstances and Rukshana's. For example, the thing about like relatives speaking in Nepalbhasa among themselves, and then like immediately when they have to speak to me, they'll switch switch languages. That's, I think, like a common theme for quite a lot of us, at least in our generation. So that's something. So maybe there are other things that resonate with people, and they can share their thoughts and comments on that too.
I think I should like shut myself down for a while because like my throat is starting to hurt.
Yeah, I think like because I was never really taught the language and I always like grew up speaking Khas language. So like now, like even when I try to speak in Nepalbhasa, and like my family members, they just like reply back in Khas, and like it just makes me so awkward because like now I feel awkward sometimes like to speak in my own native language just because I'm so used to speaking in Khas language. So I'm pretty sure like a lot of people out there have similar experiences as me, or as something like Rukshana said. So would anybody like to share their experiences? Anurup, do you have any more questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, if nobody has any more questions, then we can like probably end the class here.